start off with an introduction of some of the things we're getting into. Starting this channel, and I probably shouldn't start off with a review of Batman vs. Superman, but I thought it was kind of necessary to talk about. First off, the movie's getting a lot of flack from critics, and the fans don't agree. Everybody I've talked to that are comic book fans have liked the movie. A lot of the critics didn't. There's a lot of flaws. I'm not a film student or anything. I'm just a film aficionado, somebody who likes movies. Big geek. But really, I enjoyed it. I can't sit here and say that it wasn't. It could have been more fun. There was a couple flaws, but let's not talk about the negatives. Let's talk about some of the positives. All right, let's talk about the fact that, one, for the first time, we get two of the most iconic heroes in comic book / American history, film history on the same screen at the same time. It's a big deal. In addition to that, a lot of people thought Ben Affleck was going to be pretty bad. I did not agree with that at first. I thought, he's a decent actor. I knew it couldn't be as bad as George Clooney. And that's not a hit on George Clooney because I respect the guy. Somebody told me that I would play Batman even if I knew I was going to do a terrible job, which he probably didn't. I'd still take the job because at the end of the day, I was Batman. So, oh well. But the important thing, I think, to note is that everybody's beating up on Zack Snyder over this movie, and yet I don't see, critics destroying Transformers that way. Or, all three of the Star Wars prequels got higher ratings on Rotten Tomatoes. No. X-Men The Last Stand, X-Men Origins Wolverine, even Transformers Dark of the Moon. Daredevil. Yeah, Daredevil. Daredevil got higher rating. Let's be honest. 70% of the audience, of the fans, like this movie on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm just using that as a reference, and this isn't a head against Rotten Tomatoes. It's typically a website I trust. It's just critics have said 29% rotten. That this movie's just awful, and I disagree. I will talk about some of the negatives later. I think we should focus on some of the positives right now, just because. It's the first time that we get this, and I think it's important to note that in terms of character development and plot, there's a lot of things that were left. There was a lot of things that needed to be hit on, and you kind of jammed a lot into one movie, and maybe that's why this movie, it really wasn't Batman vs. Superman. They should have just called it World's Finest. I really hate the subtitle of Dawn of Justice because it makes it sound like a direct-to-video release. But that's really what it was. This really wasn't Batman vs. Superman. It was really just a Justice League prequel. This movie was more of a setup. And, Age of Ultron was kind of more of a setup for Civil War than it was its own entity as well. And, really it's just setting up what's to come. And that's not a hit on Age of Ultron. I love that movie. I own it. But I'm a comic book geek. I pretty much try to own most of these movies unless they're just not rewatchable, and certain things are just really hard to watch again. Episode 3. It's bad. But yeah, there's just certain missteps, and a lot of people are complaining about the whole Martha thing, the whole mom aspect to it. I thought that was kind of poetic. Coming from a Batman standpoint, I think Batman is kind of an important. That's a major staple. He became Batman to save lives, not take them. So he had been headed down a very dark path, and so saving Superman's life. Oh, spoiler alert! By the way, if you haven't seen the movie, this is a spoiler-filled review. So go see the movie. That's the whole point of me doing this, is to tell you to go see the movie. So I'll allow you to leave. All right, if anybody's still here, then. Freaks me out. I don't like other people walking around listening to stuff. I'm having a conversation with a machine. So, basically, it came to a point where he was either going to take a life or save one. And it just so happens to be that his mother's name it's poetic in the sense that you know, he could never save his mother. So instead, he gets a chance to make sure that a child isn't orphaned in that moment. That was the whole point of him becoming Batman, was to make sure that that never happened to another child, that they wouldn't lose their parents in such a violent way. So he realized, you know, in that moment that this is me not going down that path, me not becoming something that's incurable. I mean, it's basically premeditated murder. Like he, you know, and throughout the rest of the film, people are dying because of him, but it wasn't, you know, he wasn't intentionally killing them. He was just kind of not really worried about it. In his mind, he had justified that other people were doing it, and or they got killed because they were, you know, in that situation, that it was their own fault. And he had basically dehumanized Superman in this aspect where he was okay with killing him directly because he was that much of a threat, because of all the things that had happened in the movie, and not to mention the 30 minutes of footage that got cut out that probably lead more to that aspect. But I just think that that was handled, you know, it probably could have been handled better, but I thought it was good. I thought it was poetic. And I think maybe that's there was a lot of things that Snyder was trying to do that didn't come off the same way. And it's also partially because, you know, this movie wasn't made for general audience. This was made for comic book fans. I mean, when The Flash came on screen, there was a couple people in the theater that were kind of like, what's happening? But I saw that. I mean, this movie has hints of Crisis on Infinite Earths. It has hints of Flashpoint. It has hints of Justice League War, the New 52 storyline of how they come together. There's a little bit of Injustice there. There's a little bit of, you know, The Dark Knight Returns, you know, a little twist on that. Death of Superman, spoilers. But I don't really want to touch on the negatives right now because I'm going to do that later, but just in a positive aspect, it was great to see all those things on screen, man. Like, I remember going to the store when I was a kid and buying the, you know, the Superman, the Death of Superman comic book. Like, black cover with the bleeding ass, like, it's a big deal. And, I mean, in the comic book, that's in the first 5 minutes. You start a movie like that, and it's probably starring Nick Cage. If you haven't looked that up, there's a movie called Superman Lives. It's a documentary, or it's called The Death of Superman Lives, something like that, starring Nick Cage. It's a documentary about the movie that was going to be made with Nicolas Cage playing Superman in The Death of Superman by Tim Burton. Weird stuff. That would have definitely been worse than this movie, for sure. But I mean, I liked Man of Steel. A lot of people didn't. I'm not really a Superman fan, so everybody clamored for Superman to have some action after Superman Returns, and Man of Steel gave it to us in spades. And then Batman vs. Superman addresses the issue of what happens in the aftermath of that, you know, that damage and destruction. And I personally thought it was good. I mean, a lot of people complain about Lex Luthor not being Lex Luthor. I don't know. I kind of feel like his portrayal is very reminiscent of, I don't know, just the whole, you know, he's a little douche. He's just a little douche. And I thought, kind of works, you know, for this era. A lot of people, you know, complain about stuff they shouldn't complain about. I also think that the way Superman was treated in this movie is kind of reflective of how we, as the audience, have been reacting to the film itself. Like, maybe not the audience, critics. No matter what Superman does, it's not right. Like, there's always a repercussion, and it's blamed on him, like it's his fault. He's trying to do the right thing, at least to the best of his knowledge, and yet people treat him like crap. So this movie had really good intentions, and, you know, it had some stumbles, but does it deserve to be treated worse than, you know, Daredevil? Which, by the way, Ben Affleck wasn't the worst part of that either. It's Colin Farrell. And I like Colin Farrell. It's just, oh, man. Elektra. No. That movie was... Maybe the worst part was Jon Favreau. Anyway, I digress. Point is, I'm still anxious to see what comes next, man. Wonder Woman, awesome. Like, I can't even...